morning, church. How many of you love a good story? Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, comedy or thriller, romance or horror, a good story will always grab our attention. These stories usually begin with an introduction, where we meet our protagonists or our heroes to gain perspective on their appearance, personalities, and tendencies. The plot begins to unfold when we meet the antagonist or the villain of the story, who reveals a plan to ruin or destroy something valuable to the hero. This initiates a journey or a quest to resolve the situation, where we gradually develop a relationship with the heroes and the people that join them along the way. We see the best and the worst of each character, watching them grow along the journey. The story leads up to a final confrontation, where the heroes and villain must settle their differences. As the villain embarks on their most devious ploy to date, the hero steps in and saves the day. We celebrate alongside their satisfaction, and when the resolution unfolds, we watch and smile as our heroes ride off into the sunset. The question is, why do we enjoy these stories so much if we know how they are going to end? What's the point of going through the journey if we are already familiar with the destination? Well, to put it simply, most humans delight in stories where good triumphs over evil. But we also enjoy it when the antagonist or the villain receives appropriate justice or punishment for their actions. The more evil the ploy, the harsher consequence we desire. For example, in a romantic comedy, the proper justice for the arrogant guy who tried to steal the beautiful woman away from the male protagonist deserves a pie to the face. In an action thriller, the villain who destroyed half the city deserves to never see the light of day again. This desire for prevailing justice seems to be ingrained in us. But by what? Or by whom? Is it the movies we watch? The books we read? The stories we tell? Well, to answer that question, we have to learn more about the author of justice himself. Unfortunately for us, the Bible, we believe, teaches us these lessons through its countless number of stories. And over the next few weeks, we are going to examine how God, our great judge, utilizes justice throughout the biblical past, as well as discuss how God continues to utilize this concept in the present day. We're going to begin with Daniel 5, the writing on the wall. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for the 1,000 of nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and concubines, may drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and concubines, drank from them. As they drank wine, they praised the God of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand of the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that the legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck. And then he will be made the third highest ruler in all the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Do not be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in all the kingdom. Daniel then answered the king, You may keep your gifts for yourself, and give the rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted put to death, he put to death, and those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted, and those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was disposed from the royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass with the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of the earth, and sets over them any one he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You have the goblets from his temple brought to you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines, and drank wine from them. You praised the god of silver, gold, and bronze, and iron, and wood, and drank from them, which cannot see, or hear, or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Here's what... Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here is what the words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then, at Belteshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, and a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night Belshazzar, the king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Daniel 5 recounts the events surrounding the fall of Babylon and the last Babylonian ruler, King Belshazzar. No more of our friend Nebuchadnezzar anymore. He has since passed on. Along with Nebuchadnezzar is seemingly gone a fear of the Lord. The last words of Daniel 4 leave us to believe that for a temporary period God had his blessings over Babylon and its once tyrant dictator. After restoring his kingdom back to him, he declares God as his Lord, with Nebuchadnezzar writing in Daniel 4, verse 37, Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble. However, we see since the conclusion of Daniel 4 how fast things can change when a government with unlimited authority and ulterior motives takes power. Now, there was a 10-year rotation of kings leading up to Belshazzar, After Nebuchadnezzar's death around 562 BC, Amel-Marduk, his oldest living son at the time of the appointment, was appointed king. Now notice how his surname there is Marduk, and that's going to be a pattern. Amel-Marduk only made it 2 years after his brother-in-law, Nerig-Lizar, killed him and claimed the throne. He ruled for 4 years before dying and was eventually succeeded by his son Labashi-Marduk, who eventually was overthrown by Belshazzar, who proclaimed his father Nabonidus as king. One of Nabonidus' main objectives was to reform the religious policies of Babylon, wishing to raise the pagan god Sin to the status of supreme deity and demoting the other Babylonian deities of the time, including that of Marduk and, of course, our god Yahweh. Marduk had been made the banner god of Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar I around 1100 BC. And of course, King Nebuchadnezzar, the one we have gotten to know, declared Yahweh as Lord around the year 570 BC. The attempt to elevate the pagan god Sin was met with failure due to the considerable opposition within Babylon, and Nabonidus was exiled and replaced with Belshazzar. 6 kings in 10 years. Now, chapter 5 begins with a lavish feast hosted by Belshazzar, where he uses sacred goblets taken from the temple in Jerusalem to drink wine and praise his gods. Now, during the feast, a mysterious hand appears and writes on the wall of the palace, which terrifies the king. Daniel, a wise man known for his ability to interpret dreams and solve difficult problems, is brought before the king, who promises him great rewards and authority if he can interpret the writing. He explains that the writing, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, signifies the imminent downfall of Babylon. He interprets the words as a divine judgment against Belshazzar and reveals that the kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. That very night, the prophecy is fulfilled as the Medo-Persian army, led by Cyrus the Great, invades and conquers Babylon. Belshazzar is killed, and the once invincible Babylonian Empire comes to an end. Now, I do see a parallel here when we look back to 2 Kings, and we see the final rulers of Judah before the Babylonian exile. Seemingly, once the good king's reign is over, the evil sons or his successors take over and quickly drive the land to its eventual demise. In 2 Kings 22, we meet Josiah, a king that desired to do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and described as someone who followed completely the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. Josiah completely removes all traces of paganism throughout Judah, getting rid of the mediums and spiritists, the household gods, burning altars, etc., destroying the pagan temples, etc. However, after all of this, we learn in 2 Chronicles 35, chapter 35, verses 20 through 22, we see that Josiah decides to ignore a divine revelation given to him by God to avoid conflict with the king of Egypt, Necho, at the time. Josiah decides to disguise himself and engage in battle, ignoring God's command. Because Josiah did not heed that warning, he was fatally wounded and died a painful death. This triggers a domino effect of the final evil kings of Judah before its eventual fall. Joash did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his predecessors had done, and died and was replaced with his older brother Joachim. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem, which causes Joachim to change allegiance to Babylon, therefore doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. He eventually betrays this agreement with Babylon, causing Nebuchadnezzar to reinvade Judah, and leads to his eventual death. His son Joachim did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. Soon after, an army, again led by Nebuchadnezzar, came and overthrew Judah, and Joachim was taken captive back to Babylon. He was replaced with Zedekiah, who was appointed as the puppet king of Nebuchadnezzar. He too did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and was eventually taken prisoner and died in prison. So, what's the theme we can gather here in all of this? Well, let me explain it this way. Let's say Lil Johnny stole a chocolate bar from a candy store in the middle of the night. Johnny takes the chocolate bar and runs into the woods and quickly unravels it. However, Johnny, who thought he grabbed the chocolate bar without nuts, accidentally grabbed the one with nuts. Trusting that he had snagged the correct bar, he quickly eats the chocolate. Suddenly, Johnny, who has a severe peanut allergy, ends up getting sick and needs to go to the hospital. Now, if I were to tell this story to a bunch of random people on the street, they would use one word to describe the story. It begins with a K. Karma. The idea that what goes around comes around. Now, while I agree with the principle, what goes around comes around, does have some biblical truth to it, and I'll explain that in a bit, I very much deny karma, or the use of the word, as it often goes hand in hand with the idea of reincarnation. Good intent and good deeds contribute to good karma and happier rebirths, while bad intent and bad deeds contribute to bad karma and bad rebirths. For example, in reincarnation, if you were a murderer or a thief in your past life, when you die, you would be reincarnated into a pig, ready to be slaughtered and turned into bacon. Or you return in the human form as another murderer or another thief to spend the next life in prison. As Christians, we don't believe in this idea in reincarnation, but we do value the idea of justice. We do value the idea that our actions have consequences. Proverbs 1. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and chain to adorn your neck. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. To summarize, good eventually prevails, and evil eventually suffers. While we as Christians should look at karma as false teaching, we can observe in how following God's will for our own good benefits us. For example, we see how Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is restored back to him in Daniel 4 after he declares God as Lord, or how Josiah delays the fall of Judah by destroying the pagan idols that had corrupted Judah. Or we can see how he blesses Daniel over and over again for his obedience throughout his entire career in Babylonian captivity. On the other hand, the fate of the bad kings of Babylon and Judah serve as a reminder of God's sovereignty and the consequences of pride and disrespect towards his will for us. However, it is important to remind ourselves, especially in this age of political turmoil around the globe, that God has complete control over all things. There is no human man or woman in power that is going to alter God's plan in this world, no matter how good, how bad, or how powerful. As we can learn from history, there is no nation or kingdom that has that kind of authority. Seemingly invincible kingdoms throughout history, such as Israel under Solomon, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, the Roman Empire for almost 1,500 years, and the British Empire all eventually crumbled. What we can take away from this is to avoid the temptation that a politician can save us from a demise, or that we can control our own destiny. You can attempt to find hope in your political party, your family, your job, your friends, your 401k, or your pension, but there's no certainty in any such thing. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your favorite politician is going to let you down. Your family will eventually pass on from this world. Your friends will move away and start their own families. Your 401k is going to dip dramatically, and your pension may eventually dry up. Brothers and sisters, our only hope is to place our faith in the one who can actually save us. This is not to say that once we place our faith in God through Christ Jesus, that the road will be all sunshine and rainbows, because it won't. But the guidance of the Holy Spirit will help you determine the will of God and His purpose for your life. And the more you chase after this good and deny evil temptation, like Nebuchadnezzar did, like Josiah did, like Daniel did, you will find more blessings surrounding you and more comfort in times of trial. So today I ask you, where is your faith? Is it in Christ Jesus? Are you putting something ahead of Christ? Are you not sure? Well, tonight I want you to go home and ask yourself that very question. And if you feel as though your faith in God is not your top priority, I challenge you to pray to Him, repenting of your prior sin, and declare Him as your top priority.
My friends, I want to thank you for watching this full sermon today, and I'd also like to invite you to a Sunday worship service at 9:30 at Danbury Church of Christ. Following our 9:30 Sunday worship service, we will be holding Bible classes for all ages. We hope to see you there.